Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says, powered by Design 2147, a New York City building and code consulting firm. Today, I have a new guest by the name of Andrew Esposito of Apex Development Group. Andrew, welcome aboard.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
World is a small place.
Yes, it is.
So we always start the show of how we made our connection. And then usually after we make that first connection, we always find out that there's many, many more connections that we can refer to. So Jason from BizDevel that I met several months ago, we were talking about my show. And he said, look, I got a great guy to come on the show. His name is Andrew Esposito. He does real estate development, has been doing a lot of charter schools. He has great knowledge and background.
Right.
And I go, well, that would be a great show because we do a lot of charter schools. You're developing them. And the world of the charter school has been changing. But lo and behold, before we put the cameras on, we were chatting. And of course, we talked about people that we knew in Queens and around. And Joe Matone, Sr., who was a dear friend of mine and of my family. And sure enough.
And mine as well.
Exactly, and your dad being a judge in Queens is that we mentioned a few names, and my brother-in-law, Monsignor Jamie Gigantiello.
Wonderful person.
And Monsignor Casado. So the world is small, and that's what makes this show great is
Absolutely.
Because I believe in the power of people and meeting new people. So thank you for taking the time out and coming in. So your dad's a judge. I don't know what your siblings do, but they're probably lawyers. And at some
I have
point,
two, and they're both lawyers.
Of course. And of course, you probably, with your development background, probably at some point went to law school as well. That's
Yes,
just
I
a
did.
guess.
Yes, I did. I'm an attorney. I don't practice. I'm an admitted attorney, so I took the bar exam. But yeah, I mean, the theme of I think a lot of what we'll talk about today is relationships. So thank you to Jason Hudson for connecting us. Jason and his company at Cornerstone, aside from some of the networking activities, is our title company and quite a bit of work. And he and I always talk about the power of relationships, and it's very much my story getting to where I am today.
And I think that's true of most people that are entrepreneurs. Actually, the producer of this show, Fran Volpe from Why Not You Media, he's starting his own little like TikTok, Instagram thing, and he has a bunch of them going on. But he has a great one now where he talks to random people who own businesses, and he asks them 3 questions, and they're really simple questions, but have enormous power of how we get to where we are.
Yes.
The good, the bad, and what we would do differently.
That's right.
And in every entrepreneur's life, we do that. So here we are. You tell me a little bit about your background. You talk about being a lawyer. And a lot of lawyers do end up in some part of development, real estate. So fast forward, Apex Development Group, who is it? What do you guys do? What do you specialize in? Obviously charter schools, but I'm sure there's more.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So, and my background academically was finance before law. So it was a nice mix of sort of fundamental foundational elements of what I do today. To my point that I'm an admitted attorney, I take continuing legal ed every year. I keep it up. I review all of our legal docs. I don't practice for our firm. We use third-party counsel on everything, but all the sort of stepping stones in my life have very much led me to kind of where I am, even the ones that didn't seem that way at the moment.
Right,
when you're
of course.
thinking, oh, why is this happening to me? Or
So
how
why
the hell
am I
did I
taking
get
this
here?
class? It has nothing to do with what I'm going to be.
So I had an opportunity to join a developer after law school. Dabbled in finance for a bit before law school, dabbled in law for a bit during and shortly after law school, and then joined a development firm pretty quickly after law school. And had the opportunity to learn really soup to nuts the entire development process with an active, mid-sized, Queens-based developer who was active in the boroughs. And one large aspect of our portfolio with that firm was charter schools. And when I learned about charter school development was when they learned about charter school development, because we had acquired a parochial school building as a company. We were going to convert it to residential housing. And before we did so, actually an educational attorney friend of ours had said, why don't you consider talking to a charter school tenant?
leasing it, right.
And we said, what the hell's a charter school?
Right.
We really didn't know, how they were structured, how they were
They
financed.
really didn't get popular in New York City. It's when we say recent in New York City, you got to remember New York City has hundreds of years of development.
That's right.
So recent is the last 30 years.
Exactly.
Before that, it was either you went to public school, you went to a faith-based school, whether it was Lutheran, Jewish, Catholic, whatever you went, that was it. Those were your only opportunities. You know, unless you lived in Manhattan and there was more opportunities for truly private schools. But then all of a sudden, you know, we same thing happened to us. All of a sudden, an architect called us up and says, "Yeah, we're doing a charter school," and we're like, the heck is that?
It's a charter school.
Exactly.
And you hear about them because there's some political components because of union issues, et cetera, that aren't really super relevant. But, so, you know, you'll hear about someone being pro or anti-charter. The fact of the matter is they're public schools. And that's a misconception as well.
Right.
That they're, aren't they private schools? They're fully public schools. They have an autonomous executive team, so they're sort of run privately,
Correct.
which is why people tend to think of them as a hybrid, but they're completely public schools anyone could go to for no tuition.
Right. And my understanding is that the way that it works is that they get funded through private equity, through government. There's a million different ways. So the charter school is really just a private school. It's just not under the Board of Ed, and it's not under the parochial school system or the Lutheran system or whatever whatever entity is running the school.
Yeah. So the right way to think about it, they're New York State public schools. So when you talk about a public school, the way, you know, we in the city and the boroughs,
We think of it New York City.
New York City Department of Education public school. Charter schools were created to supplement an otherwise challenged New York City public school system. That's a large component here in New York State of kind of how they came to be.
We couldn't build the schools fast
between
enough.
the SCA, which we were chatting about before, you know, the city agency tasked with constructing public schools, DOE public schools, and the DOE, the city agency tasked with operating them, are severely backlogged, like
100%.
everyone else and every other agency. So charters sort of came into play to supplement them at the state level. So they are publicly funded, from New York State. And so what, you know, and there's some different ways to capitalize them from a real estate standpoint, but when they began to gain popularity in the development community was after 2015, when there was a change in the state educational law to allow for facilities funding, so additional dollars allocated for the purpose of facilities expansion because of the expensive nature of real estate in New York City. So rental assistance or facilities funding was created by the state legislature in 2015 to supplement dollars for the purpose of payment of rent for charter school facilities in New York City.
And hence repurposing the parochial schools and other.
Correct.
Well, it's not just
and building ground up
and building
buildings,
ground up stuff,
which is what we've been able to do, which is really neat. I mean, effectively, what we do is we're signing a long-term lease and completely privately financing these projects. So you mentioned, I think, Civic, and there's some other groups that also work in the space, and they rely upon municipal bond financing, and there's some other more creative ways which we could touch on if we'd like to. But what we do is actually the most simplistic model. We sign a long-term lease, we go to a private bank,
and we say, we're going to build this.
And we build a $50 million building, ground up, 60% debt, 40% equity. We write a check.
Just like you would if you did any other kind of development.
Exactly.
Right. So it's so you basically, or you go to a school that's renting it. You own the lease. You go to the charter school and say, look, we're going to clean it up. We're going to repurpose it. You give us the plans. We'll build whatever you want.
Exactly.
This is your rent at the end of the day. We own the lease with the diocese for 99 years. God
so we've
bless
done
you.
99-year ground leases. That's a good concept as well. But with existing buildings, we could take a master lease and turnkey it for the charter school tenant and sublet it to them.
Exactly.
So within different frameworks like that, that's what we do in the charter space.
Well, I have a very interesting question for you. So, over the last several weeks, we've been talking about Mayor Adams in the city of Yes. And the city of Yes means a lot of different things.
Yes, it does.
Right? So
right now, everyone's talking about the housing opportunity component.
Correct. And I was just going to say that it's not just about housing. So for the audience, there's a lot of places that the city of Yes, perfect example is for the local small business who's on, Francis Lewis Boulevard, who wants to open a nail salon, that they are not jammed up in the building department for months and months, or a small restaurant that waits 6 months to get an Ansel Hood inspection, and they're paying rent, and before they even open, they're already
accruing all these costs.
Right. So the city of Yes, it really means a lot. But when we're out networking, talking to Jason, talking to people like yourself, talking to architects, talking to anyone in the real estate world, brokers, they're saying that there are opportunities now for charter schools to be revamped and come back at the same way we saw it 7 or 8 years ago. And, you know, we've been hearing about 485X, and I did a whole newsletter on it. I had people come in, and everyone was so optimistic. And I can honestly tell you,
No one's built anything yet.
we haven't gotten one RFP from it.
A fact.
It's a fact, right? Second thing, office to residential conversion. We had a lot. Now we're starting to see them because developers are figuring out which buildings it can work in. Corner building, 3 sides, a little shallower.
Floor plates.
4 plates better, locations better. Developers always figure it out because developers like you, and I can see it just in your eyes, they're not happy unless they're building. If they're not developing and they're not challenged, the whole aspect of development to me is taking a piece of land, figuring a way to make it work, and for you to have a long-lasting, sustainable piece of equity.
That's right.
And without that, you got no mojo.
And that's why the last few years, absent any tax abatement, before 21A expired, I mean, residential housing completely stopped aside from, limited condo markets.
Right.
And
that's what
whatnot.
we're doing right now. We got a couple of new towers, but they're condos.
So you're right. So, guys like me and women like me have been just, chomping at the bit the last few years, just eager to kind of make
and I can tell
deals
you
work.
what other developers told us. They're not going to let you build here. We'll go build somewhere else. We'll go to Mount Vernon. Anywhere on a train station from here to Kingston, we could build affordable housing.
We've been seeing that as well.
From here to the end of Long Island. How much development, a buddy of mine owns Heatherwood, Doug Patrick. He stopped building in New York City after the 421 got pulled back. He's back in Long Island building again. You're not going to build where you can't make money. So to me, there's a lot of fluff in a lot of this. And it's not in a bad way. It's just it takes time for developers to find out whether there is opportunity for these programs to benefit them. If they're not going to benefit them, they're not going to jump into the program.
And nobody wants to be the first because, by nature, our business is taking risks and investing money, at risk. So everybody's waiting to see. And by the way, the flip side of that coin is the folks who make the correct bet on those risks earliest on can do very well, but if you don't make the right risk, you could also get wiped out. And a young guy like me, I'm cautious about that, but we have to be very creative in every way that we approach.
100 and plus financing got expensive, so that hurt all of us.
That's
right?
the other big factor the last few years. It's been really stifling.
So on the charter school, I hear these rumblings that there's some kind of language in the city of Yes to help support it or bring more of it. Is that a fair statement, or is that just...
So here's the major limitation. My understanding is that there's not any kind of robust framework pertaining to education in any capacity, charter or otherwise, within City of Yes. There's in M zones, you need a BSA special permit. So you can't do a school in an M zone without a BSA special permit.
And the SCA gets a mayor override, so they don't have to go through.
I've heard some rumblings that in certain neighborhoods, like in parts of the Gowanus and Brooklyn, that
they're going to need it.
You're going to be able to because of the need that you might be able to override that.
Where the kids going to go to school.
So I've heard, and we haven't delved into some of the details, frankly, because we've heard so much wavering about how much of this is actually going to get passed. Where when it gets done, we'll figure it out real fast. But we're starting to prep on some of this. But the real limiting factor that's important to understand is that there is a cap in Albany that no new charters can be licensed. And this happened in when the New York State legislature swung Democrat, because, without getting into politics, typically the Democrats are opposed to charters because they're non-union operated, which the New York City DOE is union operated. It's the UFT, the teachers union.
Right.
So it's this interesting dynamic. And by the way, that's one of the reasons that they're built more cost efficient and run more effectively and efficiently, in my opinion. But they come with challenges because of the union.
Came.
Exactly. So when the legislature swung Democrat, a cap was placed at Albany. No new charters could be printed because the process prior was that any one of us could go to Albany if we had the proper background. We could apply for a charter and we could get issued a charter and open a school.
Right. So if you're like National Academy, right, who operates 4 of them here in New York. They're already licensed. They can continue to go and find properties and expand their portfolio.
That's right. So that's where there's been sort of, people refer to it as a loophole. It's not. It's just the way that we've still seen charters expanding is within expansions of existing charters.
There's
no new charters.
No new
can be
players.
applied for. So if you have an elementary school, if you have a charter, which is a license to operate from New York State for K
Right.
through 5, which is an elementary school,
We have a few
you
of
can
those.
apply for an expansion
to 6 to
middle school 6 through 8, and then high school is 9 through 12.
Yeah, like we have one charter school that we worked on up in Harlem,
Okay.
right? And they built the first phase of the building. And they built the building, but they bought a big lot. Right now, the back lot is a playground in an area, but the concept
plan
was
to expand later?
Right. The
Yeah.
concept was for them to fill this and then build that.
Right. Because when you open a new school, typically, unless a school is relocating from one location to another, like our charter school, we're doing 2 right now, but when they open, they'll open 1 grade at a time. So if it's a K through, if it's a K
Correct.
through
That's
5,
how they did it
K1,
also.
2. So they have some time to kind of stabilize and ramp up.
And get the appropriate help, run the building,
right.
find the teachers, get
Now,
the
some
program.
of those expansions are still subject to New York State approval, and we've
Right.
seen charters who go for apply for an expansion and it gets denied, based upon things like test scores, things like enrollment capacity,
be.
et cetera. So,
But from the development side, if and this is the way I understood it as well, so I'm glad for the clarity. But to the audience, if a new charter school wants to come into the game in New York State, not New York City, but New York State, and says, I want to build a charter school in Long Island, if they were not previously licensed here or had a charter school, they can't come here.
capped, no new charters.
Right,
That's
so-
what's been the main limiting factor. So like we'll have all the time when a broker or a partner or a colleague is, I got a great community facility building, or I got, I'm building a resi building. I have an extra 40,000 feet of community facility floor area, perfect for a charter school. Well, the first question I ask is, and it's largely relationship based. We generally know what operators have charters in what neighborhoods.
Right, of course.
Because they're chartered also per CSD, Community School District.
Oh, gotcha.
So the city is broken up between 31 of them. 31 is Staten
So,
Island. The other
if National Heritage is in St.
CSD,
Rosalima,
CSD 15 in
right,
Brooklyn
they
cannot locate in CSD 17 in Sunset Park. There's a mechanism.
so it goes from that to that.
It was already exact. That's my point. So it's already a little more limited than people think, and it gets
then it
more
gets even
narrow.
micro.
And by the way, there's more. We could even go. So
Right, and so
there's
before
not
you
a
know
lot of it.
There's not a lot of there's not a lot of opportunity. So do you think that the administration is looking to change that availability? Because we do a lot of SCA work.
Sure.
They've been a great client of ours. I take
We've
my
done some work with the SCA also, and they're all wonderful people.
they have a very difficult job. The parents are complaining that the classes are overcrowded. The real estate is tremendously expensive in all the boroughs. A lot of the sites that they get access to are just tough sites. They're either got big Brownsfield programs, they have trafficking issues for kids to get in and out, and they got M1 districts, they need mayor overrides, and yet they're able to crank these schools out at a crazy pace.
Yeah.
But at some point, they're falling behind now. I mean, everything that I'm reading, and we bid a ton of them. We just got one in last week from one of our architects, brand new school, 40,000 square foot, brand new
SCA,
building,
public school, SCA.
public school, yeah, and they can't keep up with it.
Oh,
So
yeah.
if you don't, and as we all know, Catholic schools throughout the country, not just in New York City, they're closing left and right. There's-
Parochial schools, even the yeshivas, we're seeing it
Everywhere.
The religious schools, and
The religious schools are
it's
just-
sad to see, but it's a reality.
Yeah, and it's not one faith. It's across the
Yep.
board. Even the churches, even the temples. Less and less people are going.
Yep.
They want to do everything, virtual. So you could stay home and listen to mass. You don't have to, go to church.
Yeah,
You can-
post-COVID, right? Had an
and
impact
even my
on
brother-in-law, he streams his mass every
Does
Sunday
he?
at 10:00, right? So, my point is that at the end of the day, there's no way the SCA in New York City can fill the gap of how many seats they need versus what they can produce.
Without a doubt. In fact, it's no secret. It's public. You can go on the SCA's website, and they have a list.
They tell you how
they have
short.
a
They
list
tell you.
by school district of where they have shortfalls.
Absolutely.
And putting aside the political aspect of it, we knew some folks over the years at the SCA as well, and they would kind of hint on the side when nobody was listening, keep building charter schools. We need the help. It's a public school in the city.
Well, and plus, our population continues to grow. We're getting rid of Sheldon Lobel, before he passed away, I had a conversation with him at a zoning breakfast, and we were having a cup of coffee together, and I always loved his insight. And he believed that zoning was about people. It wasn't about architecture. And he would say, he'd walk into a diner and say, look, let me have a cup of coffee, a couple of eggs, and what's your name? And the guy would say, I'm Jose. I came from so-and-so. My parents migrated here. I opened this restaurant 10 years ago. And he would say, what does this neighborhood need? And he was smart because everybody who came in there would complain, the cleaner closed. This guy closed. So they come up with the concept of office to residential conversion. And they put all of this emphasis of all the empty offices that are now going to become apartments. Okay, that's a piece of it. But where's the supermarket? Where's the schools? The SCA can't build them.
Right, and those all go hand in hand, right?
And a private developer can help them.
It's actually an interesting concept, because when you're building communities, like you look at like the Innovation Queens rezoning, in Astoria, Long Island City, where there's going to be 3,000 new units of residential housing, and everyone tends
We're
to
actually going to
everyone
Pinnacle
tends
Realty
focus,
to talk to them about that.
There you go, and everyone tends to focus on the residential components, but what about the retail? What about the schools? What about the supermarket, the movie theater? So it's interesting to kind of see how some of that
you can't put this
the developments.
population in a 1 mile circle and say, well, where's my kid going to go to school?
So when you say Pinnacle, Joel Wiener?
Yeah.
Pinnacle, so I'm working with Joel right now on something, and I won't say where it is because it's very preliminary, but where he's doing a very large-scale development in the Bronx, and he has quite a bit of community facility floor area within it where he'd very much like to incorporate a school.
Right, and
so we've been looking at a charter school scenario there with him.
But there's a perfect example, right? And I'm glad you brought that up, Andrew. We do zoning studies. Developers come to us and say, hey, we may want to purchase this. This is what our broker told us. We want to do this, this, and this. And for the longest time, people say, well, max it out. Okay, and we'd say, look, you can have 1.0 of commercial. You can have 2.0 of community facility, and then you're in an R10, whatever, you get 8 or 9 FAR.
Up to max for the resi.
For the resi. And for the longest time, nobody was building the community facility. If you don't put out an initiative and you don't partner with developers to put the community facility in, you can't use the space for anything. They're not going to build it.
Yep.
If there's no market, you're not going to build 40,000 square feet of community facility for it to be empty.
And by the way, some people do.
Right.
And they've gotten very hurt because it's very hard to fill unless you have a game plan. And it sits vacant for quite some time.
And a perfect example of that is the guest I had before this episode was an architect. And what he was saying is the design portion of community facilities has changed. Doctors do more telehealth. They need bigger lobbies, smaller lobbies, and more office space because they don't want all the people sitting in one place. So even the design...
It's a great point. By the way, the most critical factor in what you're saying right now, think about a public school, gymnasium. 23-foot high ceilings, 5, 6, 7,000 feet of column-free space. Nobody builds expanses of spaces like that in buildings unless you have a reason to do so.
Of course.
By the way, that's one of the reasons that most of what we've done in the charter space has been ground-up construction.
Because you can fulfill the program.
Unless you're acquiring a school building that's closed down, even converting offices. There's cafeterias, auditoriums, these large, high-ceiling, column-free spaces. They don't just exist.
Listen, we look at all of those, even when they repurpose the parochial schools, those cafeterias that have PA spaces were designed in the 50s and 60s. Some of them were designed with no codes other than the old code.
Yep.
There was no zoning. Now, when you look at the 2014 code and you try to repurpose it for a new, and first of all, what do we do now? They're all multi-purpose. They're not just a gym.
Yep.
They were using it as an auditorium. We use it
That's
as a
right.
cafeteria. We use it because it costs so much to build it. We can't build 3 of them. You'd have to build school, have to be 100,000 square feet instead of 60.
That's another, by the way, that's another aspect of the efficiencies that we can achieve with charter schools, where the SCA, DOE, true public schools,
They have to deal with their
they have SCA guidelines and
Correct.
standards that still might dictate aspects
Oh,
like
100
that. Charter schools have the ability and the autonomy to be more flexible and to combine a gym and an auditorium. Now, look, we're still mindful as a landlord to a charter school on a very long-term lease. And I mentioned 30, and there's a reason, because a tax exemption applies for a lease in excess of 30 years, but sometimes our leases are even longer. Our interests are very much aligned. If this school cannot retain enroll students and retain students and
hurts you.
families, they can't pay the rent, and
right. It's not always about part of your success is believing in the client who takes that space.
completely.
Because without them, they're not paying the rent.
And we're signing full recourse guarantees on certainly on construction loans,
Sure.
sometimes on permanent
You're on the
mortgages.
hook.
I mean, we just signed full recourse. Our Forte Prep Charter School in Queens Boulevard, $32 million loan. We signed, myself and partners all signed full recourse, joining several guarantees.
It's amazing. You look so damn good.
It's people don't appreciate that. They don't understand,
I
the
do.
stress certainly, but the risk. I mean,
The
and I'm a young guy, and I consider myself to be generally intelligent, but there's certainly smarter people. But everything is very carefully calculated, because really one wrong move to the scale of what we're doing is game over.
Listen, everyone, my father, an Italian immigrant, and it's been mentioned on the show many, many times. I lost my dad 2 years ago this November. And he came to this country, and he worked on a garbage truck, and he bought real estate in Astoria. And before he passed away, I sold his holdings. And a good friend of mine who is a
Is that what he wanted? Is it-
at the point before he passed away,
Yeah.
he said, "Sisto, it's time."
Okay.
I said, "Dad, these things are worth a fortune. It just doesn't, it's not practical anymore." So I did a couple of zoning studies, and I put it out to bid. And a friend of mine who is he grew up in Astoria, and he's a developer.
That's where my family's from too. Both my parents are from Astoria.
Yeah, I was born on Ditmars on 36th Street.
My parents had an Italian deli. My dad's father. It was
Where was
called Carl's Dairy. It was next to where
I
Contra
used to
was.
go to Carl's Dairy.
Of course,
all the
everybody
time.
knows Carl's.
Sal worked there forever.
That was so. My mother was a cashier. My father was making mozzarella in the
I knew
back,
your
and
dad.
that's how my parents met.
Carl's Dairy. I used to go. My friend Sal used to work the.
I'll have to tell him. I don't. It was obviously
He'll know.
after my time, but I'm
Yeah,
sure
it
my
was
father
an Italian
knows.
kid. His name was Sal. We used to hang out at Astoria Park. So I was in Carl's Dairy all the time
When
on
you said
31st Street.
Astoria, and I see your age, I'm sure. I figured you would have known.
Yeah. So, but at the end of the day, my father used to always say that with the real estate, he didn't have people to back him. He bought it with nickels and dimes and a handshake. And we sold some of his properties in the millions. And at the end of the day, the part of it that's intriguing to me is my father always had a line. He'd say, "Ma Sisto, if it was easy, everybody do."
That's right.
He wouldn't say everybody would do it. He would say everybody do. And so, yeah,
I
it's
love that.
easy. Oh, I'd love to be in the development world. Okay, we've developed a couple of properties, Andrew, and we've done very well with them. But we took major risks.
Major risks. They're not all winners. There's different kinds of complexities that come along with each of them. It's sort of unfortunate that development has become this 4-letter word in some ways in the city. And especially within the realm of what I typically work within with nonprofits and community facilities and public education. A lot of it is really doing good kind of work.
It is because you're providing, you're providing a service. You're not just building. You're providing the opportunity for a young child to go to a school and get educated. And there's a lot to be said that you were part of that. Besides the financial part of it, somebody has to do it.
For sure, especially the mission of charter schools and their existence again as sort of like a supplement to the New York City public school system was that they need to be in places where there's challenged demographics and economics, et cetera. So they tend to be
And specialties.
there's
Some of the charter schools are about giving
sciences
kids
and
right
math,
and
et
giving them
cetera.
an opportunity for architecture or giving them life sciences or whatever it might be. But those opportunities are there because someone understands there's a market. The demographics are there. They do their they want to succeed. They're not going to try to take a lease on for them to
course.
fail. I mean,
right.
that's not their business.
And one thing, like I tell this brief story because it stuck with me, and I learned it during COVID when a charter operator who I knew had mentioned, because we were getting concerned as landlords on some assets that, was the rent going to stop? Were the doors going to close? And a charter operator said, we can't close the doors because a lot of these students, these are the only meals that they eat
Right.
in some of these impoverished communities where these things,
it's
exist.
sad.
It is, but they're
And
also...
it's also part of their day camp because both parents might be working and they don't have a
100%.
place
And that's
to
the point. It's sort of this whole person type of approach, which is different and candidly than my experience growing up. And it's giving these people like a really tremendous opportunity to improve their lot in life,
Sure,
which
and
is
you
like
feel
a beautiful thing
and you
to
feel
see.
like you part of your soul is in these projects.
We did our groundbreaking a few months ago on this one project, and there was all these young students, all different races, creeds, colors, and they're hugging me and taking pictures. And it was,
course.
I can't even tell you how fulfilling that kind of thing is. So
that's
they
awesome.
have to make economic sense. They have to be financeable and they have to be profitable. But we have the ability to do neat projects with good people and, really see, to your point, the sort of the fruits
And
of the
plus,
labor.
your roots are in Queens.
Yep.
You grew up there. Your dad was obviously part of that community.
Still is.
Your
He's on the
family.
bench, still in Queens and Jamaica.
That's awesome.
Got a couple of years left.
So, as we keep getting into the show a little bit more, and now we're starting to get towards the tail end of it. We have a part of the show which is we quote my friend Andrew Peters. I tell him he's going to give me royalties from Curry and Brown, and Andrew's job is he's an estimator for a large company around the world, and people come to him like yourself and say, "Okay, Andrew, you got this piece of land," and you say, "All right, Andrew, Andrew." I want to build a 40,000 square foot school. This is the program. I got no drawings. I have nothing. The site's got Brownsfield. It's got this. It's got that. I usually project $1,800 a square foot to build this. Am I off or am I wrong? Because I'm going to go get a $32 million mortgage. And he has to look at historical data of what other schools. He looks at your data, what you built them for, and then he projects all of the things that we can't project. Well, how much is insurance going to be next year? How much is concrete going to be? How much? And he takes this whole package and he goes back to Andrew Esposito and he says, "Mr. Esposito, I believe that it's going to be $2,100 a square foot." And you go,
I'd be out of business.
you go, "No effing way. We can't build this for this. Something's wrong." But that's his job. And the reason I bring that up is because he always says that when you're in a car, the rear view mirror is this big and it's small, but the windshield is big. So most people are always looking backwards. He goes, "But my job is always to look forward." So part of my show is I love that everybody says, "Well, I built this and I worked on that," but I like to hear all of my guests tell me about their feelings of the future because I feel like it's so genuine. It gives me a feeling and the audience that they take a lot of pride in what they're about to say. So
And I'm very opinionated. Ask anyone in my life.
Me too. And I'm also very conservative in a lot of ways, but
too.
I'm also very aggressive in others. And so for me, you've given us a picture, Andrew, about what's really, in my opinion, and I don't know it the way you know it, obviously, is that by limiting the number of licenses, of people that can become a charter school, not just in New York City, but throughout the state, because there's charter schools that are needed in Buffalo, in Kingston, maybe in New Paltz, maybe in Rochester. There's a lot of cities in New York City and small towns that maybe could use a charter school.
We tend to think the 5 boroughs
Right, because
are the
that's the
totality of New York
epicenter
State,
of the world, right?
It's a big state up there.
Right, and there's a lot of people living in Buffalo.
Yep.
And there's a lot of people living in Rochester. So where do you see do you see a change of them opening the licensing in the near future? Do you see maybe a hybrid of something happening that, like you said, they say you're licensed here, but then you keep drilling down, it gets smaller and smaller, but maybe that bubble will open up a little bit. Where do you think the charter school world is going? Are they going to open up the licenses?
Yep.
You talked about the the epicenter of where you can expand your own license currently.
Right.
And it's not just New York City, it's everywhere else. You need charter schools also in other cities, Rochester, Buffalo, whatever. New York City isn't the epicenter, but it's where you do most of your business, but maybe there's other opportunities for you too. So where do you think the political, I don't want to use the word political, but I want to use the word of expansion of charter schools in terms of licensing, in terms of different things for them to have the opportunities that are needed.
So a quick point on upstate, as opposed to boroughs and downstate, the concept of rental assistance and facilities funding that have allowed, it's the mechanism that has allowed us to construct ground up buildings does not exist outside of New York City. Important distinction.
Well, obviously the demographics, because there's so much more population here, it's more feasible, and it's a way to get people to invest.
And remember, the 2015/16 change to the educational law that created this mechanism was as a result of the expensive nature of real estate within New York City.
Gotcha.
So that's one of the main reasons we focus. But part of my everyday life is predicting where this asset class and business model is
how to
progress.
find the next piece of property.
So I think that there will continue to be expansions because it's permissible. Despite the cap in Albany, it's permissible to expand existing charters. So I think quality charters, quality operators, with exceptional, track records will continue to expand. I hear frequently from other developers that they're, interested in charter schools or looking at a charter school scenarios, but there's a lot of of intricacies, surrounding financing, design, zoning, etc. So we've seen quite a few folks take a sort of a crack at it and look at them and kind of throw up their hands and say it's too complicated.
Right.
There's a small
it's
handful.
a niche.
Yeah, it's really a niche type of asset class. There's a small handful of folks who have excelled at it. And when I say a small, 3 to 5 developers in New York City, and there's quite a few of us. So, myself being a little bit newer, but I've been working in this business for, at this point, almost going on 10 years. So I think those groups that have the expertise will continue to take on the opportunities with the exceptional operators to expand outwardly.
But I'm sure that your portfolio has changed too, because you can't build as many. So you're probably working on other types of whatever it might be, commercial, residential, whatever. You're not just doing charter schools, because if not, with these caps, that's not easy to get a couple of projects under your belt. You'll be waiting to do a project potentially once every 5 years.
And we're small enough where, like today, we have 2 ground up charter school projects and we were speaking, I think, offline earlier, half a dozen to 10 rezoning projects where we are in contract to acquire land that we're rezoning to upzone and create value in our land bases. So that's sort of one of our other business models. But those 10 or 12 projects right now, we're busy.
Yeah.
So I have friends and brokers call, it's a tough market. It is a tough market, but we are very busy as we expand and grow, which I hope that we will. You're right. Charter schools aren't everything and probably never will be in New York State because of some of the political aspects to what goes on here. But, we're working on projects that include affordable housing. We're working on a homeless shelter project right now, building a homeless shelter.
We've been in the homeless shelter business for 30 years. We work with architects that they specialize in it.
Sure.
We do a lot of 100% affordable housing that's funded by the state.
Yep.
We do a lot of that work
HPD and HUD and Article 11 projects.
So, there's a handful of architects and contractors. and we work for the nonprofits like Fifth Avenue Committee and people like that. That is their business, and they've kept us busy through this without the
And
421.
look, that's the nature of what the needs are in New
just
York
can't
City,
build,
New
but
York
they
State
just
today.
can't build them fast enough
Correct.
because they don't have enough.
So,
They're
not
non-for-profits, and they're limited.
right. We're not really, we'll look at a condo project's not terribly different than a rental project, but we're not really developing condo. We're not in Manhattan converting office to residential. We're working on things like charter schools, like affordable housing, even fully affordable, shelter projects. We're working with other community facility, nonprofit type tenants,
Correct.
not necessarily educational.
Correct.
And there is, quite a bit of activity in that space. It's a niche, like you said, but, we have really strong relationships just to kind of bring this home.
Well, and just, it's like, and we'll wrap it up this way. Being in the business development world and meeting people, right? It's funny when someone will come and say, well, do you guys do any charter schools? And we say, yeah, we do a lot of them. How do you market it? We don't. And I'll go, well, what do you mean? How do you get them? Well, an architect gets hired by a firm like yourself and says, hey, we've used, Edelman Sultan to do our charter schools. We've done a few of them with Edelman Sultan, right? Kerry will call and say, hey, sister, we have a new charter school. Can you give us a proposal? We don't know who the developer is. Our market is if that architect, where do you go and say, hey, hi, I want to be in the charter school business, right? You developed it because you worked with someone else who was in that business and they got in there at the ground level. So, hey, it would be great to go after charter schools. If they don't know that there's no market, right, and they don't understand all of these laws and where the funding comes from and why the licenses are limited and they're capped and this and that, you could be chasing this forever and never land a client.
And that's exactly right. And this more so than many other asset classes is tremendously relationship driven. But by the way, it also has lent itself to some really interesting joint venture opportunities, to the point of mentioning Joel Wiener, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind because we're chatting on a deal right now. I mean, Joel is as large scale as it gets. I would love the opportunity to work on a project with him. He has a site, never done a charter school, doesn't know anything about it,
but he wants to
build
put
community
some space
facility
in it.
space and loves the concept of public education in the Bronx. So we're working on potentially putting something together.
Listen, that's just the way the world is.
That's right.
And the power of people. If there's anything that being in this business for 38 years is, you don't know when your next deal is coming from. You don't know the next person who walks through your office. Like today, you walked in. We've never chatted before. You've come in. We've had a great conversation. You know my family. I know your family. By coincidence, in the same neighborhood, in a little part of Queens, but there's a common goal.
That's right.
We love to develop. I'm all about education. And more importantly, in today's world, the laws matter. Codes matter. Zoning matters. You can't, to me, this show is really a lot about being pro-law, because without it, the charter schools can't exist, and the kids won't be safe, and the teachers won't be safe, and the fireman who's got to come there and fight the fire in the cage on the third floor, play roof. Why do we got to use this mesh? Why can't we use this? Yeah, because the fireman's got to cut up there and cut it out so we could put his life. Yep. All of those things matter. And what you do and what I do, we have to take all of that into consideration and make sure it's viable.
Yeah.
And that it's a solid asset. And it works.
And, we factor for, again, all really important parts. And when I say some of the intricacies about charter schools, so, we like to incorporate outdoor terraces on rooftops, but you need a 10-foot setback for FDNY to drop a bucket truck.
Of course, right? Yeah, the fire department access.
There's so many, and even zoning. There are certain zoning districts in New York City where charter schools are not permitted as of right. M zone, C8 zones. Not
right.
So when I'm looking at a site, if a broker calls, if a colleague, I'm looking at, and again, I'm well versed in it because I've studied it, and we
plus
work
you practice
with
law. You understand that those laws are written for a reason.
Exactly.
You don't want kids being in school with someone manufacturing plastics next door.
Right. And the environmental comes into play. We work with OER, and
of course.
So all these aspects are super important, and you couple that with really strong consultants and professionals like yourselves, who we bring on to all. But as a starting point, we're very well versed, and that's another way where we've gained quite a bit of credibility with the operators we work with, because we have the knowledge. You know, so
Right. If they called you tomorrow and said, "Hey, Restaurant Depot wants to build a 1,000,000 square foot warehouse," you'd say, "Look, we could build anything." But we really don't know anything about, metal buildings with, logistics for 48 tractor trailers coming in
and
every day.
that's I always
But
say
the
that
flip
too.
side is, if you call me about a charter school, you know what? I consider myself an
And
expert.
that's really important. And to know what you know and to know what you don't know, I think are really important. So, and I'll have those conversations if partner or broker calls. Not really what I do, but you should go chat with this guy or gal. Charters, it's what we do every day. So,
Yeah. Well, Andrew, I have to say, thank you very much. Charter schools is a big topic when we're out in the world, because like I said, we do a lot of schools for the SCA, private schools, colleges. Education's a big part. Every kid should have the opportunity to feel that they can go to school every day and be in a
Absolutely.
safe, beautiful building. And I think that what you do, besides the fact that I hope you're making money at it, is that you are providing something that our city needs. And I look forward for you to come back.
Definitely.
I would love for you to come back in 6 months or a year from now and tell me that they expanded the licenses and the cap.
That'd be great.
And I think that would be great for the city, and I think it would be great for just for jobs in general, just all about it. So I know we're all busy. I know you're busy, but for you to take the time out and come in and do
My
the show
pleasure.
with me is great.
Thanks so much. Great to talk to you.